Right around a month ago, I posted a first look review of the GTX 1650, and many of you were not happy with that video, mainly because my opinion of this card differed from a lot of other YouTube channels out there. So let's take a second look at this card, take a look at some of your criticisms, and see if my opinion on this has changed. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and this is the much maligned GTX 1650 from NVIDIA. It features 4GB of GDDR5, 896 CUDA cores, a boost clock of 1860 MHz, and an 85-watt total power draw. And according to a number of reviewers out there, it shouldn't even exist. In my initial review of the GTX 1650, I did claim it was a viable option for budget gaming. In fact, I did call it the Budget King, and we'll circle back around to that. But I did caution against spending any more than $150 on a card, and that includes not recommending the MSI Gaming X card that I have here due to the $180 price point. But there was one sticking point in that video that a number of you were not happy with, and that was the distinct lack of an RX 570 in that video. That was a conscious decision on my part, but probably not for the reasons you think. You see, YouTube is still very much a part-time thing for me, and I don't have an endless supply of hardware or sponsorships yet. While I did receive a sample of the GTX 1650, I needed to purchase a couple graphics cards to compare it to in that same price range. I already owned a GTX 1050, 1050 Ti, and 1066 GB card, so that covers testing on the previous generation. I did not, however, own a GTX 1660, but I figured picking one up for the review and then running NVENC in my streaming rig afterwards made that an easy decision to make. But how do I represent Team Red? With the RX 570 and RX 580 being pretty close in performance already, and hoping the GTX 1650 compared much closer to the higher end of those two cards, the 580 seemed like a much better fit. So to all the people who say, it must be so nice to get graphics cards for free, keep in mind that sometimes reviewing a $180 graphics card winds up costing me $360. That is until today. Now the bill sits at $450 since I bought an RX 570 because, well, I guessed wrong and I wanted to reevaluate to see which card was actually the value king in this price point, and to give some context on how I actually run reviews on this channel. First, let's just get right into the benchmarks, which I did completely rerun with some new games this time around, but only between the RX 570 and the GTX 1650. We've already seen the performance of the other cards. Just like last time, my review system is the Ryzen 5 2600 6-core with 16GB of 3000 MHz DDR4 on an MSI B450 ITX motherboard. All games were ran at 1080p with a mix of settings depending on the title. Starting with GTA 5, which is traditionally an NVIDIA-leaning benchmark. We do see the 1650 cruise out to the early lead here, beating the RX 570 by a full 39%. And that wraps up NVIDIA's victories for the day. Swinging things back the other way is Doom, which I did originally test in OpenGL. Not to give NVIDIA any kind of advantage, but to see if there were any generational improvements in OpenGL from the 1050 Ti. Yes, Vulkan is faster, and AMD did see an advantage there, but that wasn't the point of running the test that way. Anyway, here the RX 570 does get the win, but it's not the sound butt-kicking everyone was telling me it would be, with just a 1.5% margin between the two cards. The RX 570 did see significantly better lows in these tests though. Hitman 2, which is an AMD title, sees the RX 570 average 89 FPS, edging out the 84 from the GTX 1650, although again, the 0.1% lows do favor Team Red here in a pretty big way. I did run into an issue of frame drops after loading my benchmark run on the NVIDIA card. I needed to reload the save several times before getting a run without 1-second gaps in gameplay. This did not occur on the RX 570. Sniper Elite 4 decided to cooperate this time around instead of crashing and turning on VSync in between tests like last time, so I do actually have some usable figures to show you. Here, the 1650 is a full 35% slower than the RX 570, pretty much across the board. But at 1080p high settings, it still managed 0.1% lows of just 55, making this a very smooth experience on either GPU. Warframe is a free game that does offer a single-player campaign, so I figured I would give it a whirl this time around. I believe there is a frame limit of 163, because both cards averaged 162.6 FPS on the nose. The lows were inconsistent, but still very good on both of these cards, and I thought I would include the metrics anyway if this is one game you're considering getting into. I tested the Borderlands Enhanced Edition again, with AMD taking an 11% lead at 161 FPS. Lows on both cards were very respectable as well, with the 0.1% being just a hair below 60 in both cases. Great news if searching for a Volt in a slightly higher resolution sounds like your idea of a good time. Project Cars 2 was a bit of an anomaly, with the RX 570 being around 6% faster on average, but the 1650 pulling out a large lead in the low frame times. For racing games especially, I'll take smooth performance over slightly faster averages any day. And we end with the most demanding game of the bunch, Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Here, the 1650 struggles to hold 60 FPS at high settings, managing 57.9 on average with a low of only 28. The RX 570 did manage 62 FPS on average with a low of 42, which made it a much more playable experience. However, both GPUs could do quite a bit better with a little bit of settings tweaks. So yes, the other reviewers got it 100% correct. The RX 570 is the better buy today. But was I wrong for calling the GTX 1650 the value king at $149? Probably, but let's take a step back and look at this review contextually. Again, I made the decision to purchase the RX 580 over the RX 570 for this review, mainly because I wasn't sure if the $130 price point was something that was going to last. When the GTX 1660 Ti launched, AMD dropped the price on one model of their Vega 56 as a way of showing a better price performance than their competitors. And seeing how just back in March the RX 570 was selling for $180, I expected similar shenanigans this time around. When searching for reviews, remember it is perfectly okay for reviewers not to agree with one another. That's a main reason why I recommend you watch other reviews as well as my own to form your own opinion, as the more information you have, the better decisions you can make with your money. The way I review graphics cards is slightly different than, say, Gamers Nexus or Hardware Unboxed, which are the two channels that showed up most often down in the comments of my last video. They use a standardized test bench with a 9900K, and that's a great way to get relevant performance between different graphics cards across an entire lineup, but I don't feel it lets consumers know exactly the performance they can expect if they were to go out and buy a particular card. Someone who might be in the market for a GTX 1650 or any other $150 graphics card for that matter is not going to pair it with a 9900K. And at least for my initial reviews, I do prefer to test the GPU on a similarly priced system to get a real-world result. And to be perfectly clear, I don't think the standardized test bench is a bad idea. In fact, I'm going to start testing GPUs on a standard test bench from now on as well, but it's an important distinction to make as our results may be different. The reason I didn't give an opinion on the RX 570 during that video was pretty simple. I didn't test one, and I've had no previous experience with that card either. And honestly, I just plain didn't get the memo that I was supposed to be hating the GTX 1650. I do disagree pretty wholeheartedly with the other channels on one major point, and that's, why does the GTX 1650 even exist? Come on, Nvidia, you're just taking advantage of stupid consumers and you know it! Without competition, the consumer has no choice. And in instances like this, even when the RX 570 is a clear winner, and $20 less for that matter, that doesn't mean Nvidia should abandon the race entirely. Remember when we said the RX 570 was way too expensive at $199 when it launched because the 1050 Ti was only $139 and almost as fast? Prices change over time. Market availability changes over time. And just because you aren't the leader in a particular market doesn't mean you abandon that price bracket entirely. The GTX 1650 is not the best card in the world. Heck, it's not even the best card at $149, and certainly not the best card at $179. But it does game impressively well at 1080p in a mid-range system. In the end, the RX 570 is far and away the better value right now, with the RX 580 being sneaky good at under $200 as well. But the 1650 is up to 35% faster than the 1050 Ti, while drawing only 5 watts more power and being only about $10 more expensive at launch. And, outliers aside, the margin between the RX 570 and 1650 is only around 7%. Yes, I wanted and expected better performance out of this card. And while it's not the value king I proclaimed in the last video, it's also not a complete waste of space. Again, just don't pay too much. So, what do you guys think of these cards now? Did this help give a little bit more insight into my mind as a reviewer, or am I still just an idiot? Sound off in the comments down below. Make sure to like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't like it, and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing, and if you see any hardware you'd like to pick up for yourself, make sure to follow the Amazon affiliate links down in the video description. As I mentioned earlier, my review of this free graphics card has cost me over $450 so far. I'm able to continue bringing you content like this because people like you, yes you, subscribe to my Patreon. A minimum donation of $1 a month will also get you access to my exclusive Discord server, where you can chat with myself and the other hosts from Talking Heads throughout the week. And I think that's enough self-advertisement for one day. I'm gonna get out of here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching this one, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.